when we are live. Shall I start? Okay, now we are. Yes. So good morning, everyone. Right
Good
now
morning.
we are. Good morning. So we are now starting with the second session of day 2. The session is Social Dilemma, Web of Freedom or Deceit and Lies. And we are honored to have a very special guest, Mr. Rahul Shivshankar, along with Dr. Ratan Sharda, who will be conducting the session with him. Brief introduction of the panelists. Mr. Rahul Shivshankar is the editor-in-chief of Time Now, the #1 English news channel in India. He started his journalism career 2 decades ago, working in both print and electronic media. Rahul began his career as a print reporter, pounding the streets of Delhi and then its courtroom for stories, breaking the record number of front page stories and quickly getting promoted to the edit page. One of the youngest ever leading writers at the paper, but TV beckoned. He was part of the original team that launched Times Now, receiving critical acclaim for his coverage of 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks. He was then an executive editor at Headlines Today, since rebranded as India Today, before becoming the editor-in-chief at NewsX's ITV network. He is now back at Times Now as the editor-in-chief and anchors the 8 p.m. India Upfront show, which echoes Rahul's commitment to bringing back the focus on hard facts and separate news from heritage. Thank you so much, Rahulji, for coming on board.
Thank you. The pleasure is entirely mine. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to, via this forum, address a wider audience. I've always been, of course, a great admirer of the scholarship of Mr. Ratan Sharda. So it's really a pleasure to be on a panel with him, finally.
So I have been on a panel a lot of times, so it's just the other way around this time.
That's right. So this is yes, a role reversal, if you may.
Yes. So now I'll introduce Dr. Ratan Sharda. He's been with us since the inception, and thank you, Ratanji. You've always been a pillar of support, always encouraging us and guiding us in LitFest. Thank you so much for that also. Brief introduction. Dr. Ratan Sharda is a well-known author, freelance columnist, and TV panelist. He was awarded a PhD in July 2018 for his thesis, Understanding RSS Through Its Resolutions, with focus on Jammu, Kashmir, Punjab, and Northeast. He has edited 16 books, written 6 books on RSS, and 1 on disaster management. He translated 2 books about RSS, The Incomparable Guruji Golwalkar and MS Golwalkar. His vision and mission from Hindi to English, which was written by the foremost RSS thinker, Sri Rangahari. He also reviewed Rajiv Malhotra's Being Different translation from English to Hindi. He was jailed during 1975-77 in the days of emergency while he was the General Secretary of his College Students' Union. Shardaji is a founder member of Vishwa Adhyan Kendra, which is Center for International Students, Mumbai, and was its General Secretary for 8 years. He is a member of Educational Trust under the umbrella of Keshav Christie and advisor to many voluntary organizations. He has traveled extensively in and outside India. We welcome you again, Ratanji. Thank you. So now you can, I pass the baton to you. You can start.
Thank you, Swati. And just to tell Rahul, Swati is the pillar of this entire youth-filled LitFest, focused only on youth and on people who are generally not called on the LitFest because of the typical left environment so far. So they have created a very good niche for themselves. Just to add to what Swati told about Rahul Shivshankar, I have had an acquaintance and relation with Rahul Shivshankar since the times of NewsX. And I liked the way he brought news which was not generally worthy of other channels, which was supposed to be unfashionable. And that's what I respected him during NewsX times. And I met him for the first time when he rejoined Times Now. But when we met, it was as if we have been meeting regularly. So that's the warmth we share. And he's also columnist, very rare combination of 24/7 news channel and also writing very incisive columns. So I would request people to go to his columns and see his very clear-cut thinking on various topics without being apologetic. Coming to this topic of social media, web of freedom or deceit and lies. It's a very wide, very huge subject. In fact, when I was making notes yesterday, I realized that in fact, many of them could be independent sessions. So I tried to be brief, I tried to be to the point, and of course, Rahul is expert in that. And it's a pleasure to be on the other side. And I know that being on the other side requires much more study to throw the bounces at other people rather than being on this side of answering. Yes, the pleasure is that you can throw the questions and sit back and see the uneasiness of the other side. But this is not a debate. This is a conversation, and we like to get people involved. We have seen evolution of entire news dissemination and interaction with the social media or the society through newspapers. Then radio was a big medium of dissemination for once. Then TV arrived. Then internet arrived. Then the social media arrived. That was a time when freedom of expression meant you could write letters to editor, and you would be very happy that your letter got published, especially in Times of India and Economic Times. So you show it around saying, "Oh, I got published." That is the freedom of expression. No other media had any freedom, and radio still is a monopoly. Very surprisingly, radio is very powerful worldwide, but somehow in India, our governments of whichever shade still think that you can speak anything on TV, in newspaper, but radio must be a monopoly. I do not understand this logic. Or we would have seen a thriving radio also in India, which would be not just Nach Gana and some frivolous news about film personalities. And we come from the lucky generation who has seen this entire game, right, from news to radio to TV. And when it moved to social media, first it was to make friends. If earlier people remember, when we had these freshly minted friendship sites, now it has become, in fact, a platform to make enemies. So that being so, and then the internet, of course, then the internet digital media burst in a very big way. And then we started talking about it. Then we had first time when we started seeing the democratization of the media, when you could actually speak out your mind. Earlier, you could send letters to your friends in email, write articles in email, so at least your friends would know your views and they would share. But today, when this arrived, we realized that we could share our views across the world. We could put our mind into it. We could speak our mind. And that is when suddenly the monopoly of this ecosystem of news dissemination and conversations totally shifted. And this was a very frustrating experience for the people who had controlled the narration in various media for long. Just today, there is interesting conversation which I came across between Karan Thapar and Sanjay Baru. I would request many of you to go through it, half an hour conversation, which basically bewails going out of the elite English-speaking people who control the ruling games of the rules of the game so long, to the situation where unwashed millions, people from the villages, from small town can put their mind, they can be in government. So this is what has changed hugely. And this is the time when subaltern voices, conservatives, Hindutva forces, and various kind of voices came out, could speak. That is the importance of social media. That is the democratization. Then finally, we see the huge impact of big tech on the entire narrative, where they're trying to not just control the narrative, but also to set the narrative, to do the mind conditioning. This is something where I come at the end. So with this opening, before I put in questions, I would request Rahul to add his views on this.
I'm so glad, sir, that you actually took the time out to go back into history a little bit, because as a student of history yourself, Ratan Chadha ji, and I have read, in fact, 2 of your books most recently. And I am always struck by individuals who can envelop a discourse in a little bit of deeper and wider perspective. So you talked about letters to the editor. When I was on the Times of India edit page, in fact, I was given charge of that column. And it was very interesting because a large number of voices would, find their way into the newspapers, and they were not necessarily people, and you referred to subalterns, they were not necessarily people from the establishment, if you understand what I meant. So they were voices, lay voices, readers who were speaking a language that was usually not reflected in the columns of the edit page.
Yes.
At that time. It was slightly, I won't say it was under liberal capture or occupation, but certainly there were themes that were explored on one trajectory and not quite on the other. And there were certain givens. And I found that jarring. In fact, it was Dr. K.S. Subramanian, who is, of course, the father of the present EAM of India, who actually cultivated in me a slightly right of center perspective on things. And it was very interesting working with him because he had a very firm idea, though he was very liberal and all of us are liberal. We all believe in the power of democracy. And sometimes I find it jarring that we are characterized as illiberal individuals, which is a complete hypocritic way of sort of labeling individuals to the right of the spectrum. I find that there was a lot of ideological clarity and on his part, and he was usually very forthright in putting out views which would not usually have been echoed in that sort of ecosphere. And today, and thanks to the work of people such as you, sir, and of course, television and the diversification that we have seen of television audiences, that TV itself has also in some ways become more democratized. And you were referring to NewsX. Yes, I brought in subjects there like Islamist, but thought to be not issues that anyone should even speak of in this country. We've changed the narrative in Kashmir. We were part of those debates. But today, as we speak, we are now being overtaken by the digital sphere, and social media is playing its part. And I agree with you. It has led to a democratization there also and a diversity of free speech. But what it is most is that it has brought in voices that were part of the subaltern milieu into the mainstream. And I think we have been able to penetrate deeper, unfiltered into the minds of audiences, views that in India were considered anathema. You referred to Mr. Thapar and others. I happen to know these individuals very well because some of them are related to me. And I found that conversations would be very skewed only in one direction. And if you had a point of view which was not quite along the same lines, you were ostracized, even within a family. So DNA also doesn't matter at some level or the other. And discord really takes over. I found that extremely worrying. And today, social media has, to a great extent, allowed voices that would not have been heard to get a platform. And we have succeeded in correcting the narrative. The problem now that we are seeing is the growth of big tech. And big tech is...
take it in a very detailed manner later, so you can just make a brief comment, then we'll come on that at the end of the discussion.
So as far as I'm concerned, big tech and its interventions selectively need to be discussed. And I hope that we go into this.
Oh, yes, we'll get into that. In fact, I wrote an article after Trump was deplatformed. And I said, this is the beginning. This is not something about Trump. It is about entire ecosystem which can delegitimize any person or any leader. Coming to your talk of narratives, and the way social media has arisen, I think the social media became unsocial the day the battle of narratives was joined by the people who were not supposed to know anything. And then what was the outcome? They could just throw different words at you. They could just simply deny legitimacy and to these voices. And they simply you just dismiss them like bhakt or something. As today, a new word has come into since yesterday, bright wing. So very clever at throwing new words. And this is when the cancel culture has started. That if you don't like a person, simply remove the person, remove the publication, just dismiss it. So this is the kind of intolerance that is now clearly visible. And in this particular era, when all this is happening, what is your experience about this urge of the elite class as I talked of Sanjay Baru and Karan Thapar's interview, which is very normally done, maybe they don't even realize that what they're saying is something very insulting to the common genius of India, which has survived 10,000 years. And in this particular discussion, where you simply want to deny the existence of another voice which has already overtaken India. So what is your view in this kind of bitterness that has come into this social media? I am not talking of trolls. We leave trolls aside. They are everywhere. They can be on the right, they can be on the left. But as so-called intellectuals, so leaders, opinion makers, if they start behaving this way, where will the better minorities go? I see them and they are finally losing if they behave very angrily or they behave in an irrational manner. But what is your view on this?
I think one has to look at it from the spectrum of individuals exercising control. I think for a very long time, and I don't want to use the word elite because that is a word that is laden with a lot of emphasis on achievement. It's not necessarily elites in that sense. There are a large number
No,
of
I would say entitled in that case. I would say
yes,
entitled.
of privilegencia. So there has been a privilegencia that has benefited over the last 50 or 60 years since the British sort of cultivated that sort of milieu. These people have lived off that, and there is now a pyramid. And this pyramid, whether you want to call it left or center, I also don't like to use the word liberal because it means that they are liberal and the people on the other side are not. So let's just say left of center. The left of center privilegencia feels that they are entitled to controlling the narrative, that they are the custodians of India's outlook, of the way India should be projected, of how India should think, what it should think, who it should talk to, who it should not talk to, who it should vote for, who it should not vote for, who it should decide in favor of. And from that perspective, I'm talking about the courts, who it should intercede on behalf of. So you have a situation where anyone who is challenging this status quo is then put aside, cast aside as an individual who is not part of the intellectual construct and therefore is either a reactionary, either a right-wing bigot, either somebody who is illiterate or is illiberal. And most often the word that is used and spat out almost is right-wing, as if it is a basket of all the worst things you can conjure up about individuals and put in it. Now, this space is finding itself under assault because its own intellectual A, tradition, B, scholarship is being questioned on facts by a system that is growing. I will concede that voices on the right, intellectual voices are still few, and it's only because we have been kept out of institutions and not really allowed to cultivate the mind, and we are weeded out, discriminated against. So I'm finding that that is changing, and as these voices are coming into their own, we are beginning to question theses on fact, and that is becoming uncomfortable, and that is leading to this massive backlash. And
remember, Rahul, in your own debates, people have called you stooge of BJP, government spokesperson, though you only present facts. And there is a panelist in your very popular panelist on your panel, very liked by Times Now, who generally calls him WhatsApp University scholar. So, despite so many books written, and also this is the kind of what you say, contemptuous way they do this.
Well, sir, you see, this kind of exclusivism comes naturally to the privilegencia. There is a word for it. It's called patrician. And in English, we expand the use and we say they look down upon you from their patrician noses. So the idea is to castigate in a way that not just de-intellectualizes you, but de-legitimizes you. So it's very easy to say, go the media. You see, if anyone were to look at my own writings from the time I was in the TOI, you will see that there has been an intellectual consistency. I have never been a flip-flopper. I have waited my turn 20 years. And an establishment today, which is spearheaded by the BJP, has come to power. It just so happens that what we were talking about 20 years ago today is being echoed by a political party, because today there is critical mass for that kind of view and people are voting on the basis of that particular view. So a party that is expressing that particular point of view is going to get elected. Others that find themselves at odd with that narrative are being sidelined, and you're seeing it. But you're also seeing very cynical use, both politically as well as intellectually, of tactics to try and hit out against what now is becoming a prevalent ethos. And Ratan Chadha ji, you have been a victim of it. I have been a victim of it. Several of those who are on the right of the center have been victims of it. And I think we have to now develop what is known as a thick hide. Forget about these voices, because they're increasingly becoming irrelevant in their ability to impress their point of view upon people.
Yeah, in fact,
I think the credit goes to scholars such as you.
Pressing the point that there is no left and right, there is left and non-left. Because
Yes.
within non-left, there is a huge rainbow of views, much different from the caged and very frozen views of the left. So we must stop talking of left and left in case of economic policies, but we may be a non-left because left has no issue of no concept of culture. So if you talk of culture, then
you hit the nail on the head. In fact, in India, that intellectual distinction between left and right is quite blurred on many issues. So yes, I concede that point. I think for the lack of defining people, I think this is wonderful.
Yeah. So I'll now come to the contentious part, where actually the freedom of expression, the freedom of the net became actually the framework of deceit and falsehood. See, non-left were very late entered into this social media, and left has already misused the web in a great way for mobilization, for creating disaffection and mayhem. The oldest case in this case, which we can remember, this generation can remember, is the pro-Rohingya agitations, which was fueled by WhatsApp, coming from Pakistan. You have the proofs, you have discussed this. And this was when folks' photos was released and the entire nation nearly burnt. And then we have the latest case of Greta Toolkit, which tried to create unrest into the issues. Then in between we had Kashmir. In the international scenario, the first use of social media was for Arab Spring, which in fact finally ended up promoting extreme Islamism. And latest is Black Lives Matter. So this kind of narrative which is set by left, non-left has not been able to effectively create this kind of platform and this kind of view. So how do you take it?
Well, you're very right. First of all, we need to make a distinction between material that is put out by political parties on the left and, of course, left-wing intellectuals. Political parties, whether they are on the left or non-left, or whether they are BJP or Congress, or whichever way you want to characterize.
No, this question pertains to people who don't claim to be political.
Yes.
Typically,
so this is very important.
Arab Spring, or you look at this Rohingya agitation, which was political, but it was shown as if it came from society. And I'll come to say later. Right now, I'm just focusing on the use of this media to create hate.
Yes.
And
so I think that is a very important distinction that you're making. These individuals who claim not to be political but inject a discordant voice by using fakery, why aren't they being matched, you would say, on the right? Is that what you're saying, or on the non-left space?
I would say at least put why can't they put positive narrative the way they should, or they could have, or they cannot?
I'll tell you.
I'm not talking of creating unrest. I'm talking of creating a positive narrative. For example, in Kashmir, they were much more successful initially when they had full control over media through Pakistan and all, to create the typical image of Kashmir being the center of Jammu Kashmir Ladakh issue, Kashmiri Muslims being the victims, and you yourself are a Kashmiri, so you'll understand how the true voice of Kashmir, the true culture of Kashmir was totally sidelined in this narrative. So why is it difficult to put a positive narrative and much more easier to put the negative narrative? That is another thing that comes to my mind.
It is indeed, and this I can see with experience. You see, the moment you start talking about Hindutva, or you talk about Islamist terror, there will be a rash of people who will attack you for being a fascist. Now, this particular point puts people on the defensive, and the narrative is controlled by, as I told you, influencers in the left ecosystem that range from Brown University down to, you know, whether you like it or not, Ashoka University. And you have a situation where a large number of these people work in tandem. And I actually saw it today happening before my eyes. I don't know if you are aware, but there is a tweet that is being doing the rounds of a conversation that was taking place today in the context of the Bengal elections with Mr. Prashant Kishore. And you should see the number of individuals he is speaking to and who those individuals are. Now, those individuals will tell you that A, they are journalists, so therefore apolitical. B, they're intellectuals or lawyers, and therefore totally apolitical, speaking only for constitutionality. But when you hear their conversations, there is almost a partisan reflection of their views, where they're disappointed almost that a certain political party is doing better than another political party, which gives away the entire plot. Now, what is the plot? The plot is to delegitimize any talk of Hindutva in a positive light. So anyone who speaks about Hinduness will be immediately attacked. Anyone speaking about Savarkar will be immediately cast aside as Brahminical oppressor. Anyone talking about the movement to free temples, for example, will be seen as an exclusivist and a supremacist. Anyone talking about Kashmir in the non-traditional manner, which is that, oh, we must talk about it as a place where people have legitimately turned to a form of resistance because the state is not addressing their concerns, is immediately passed off as an Islamophobe, as if the veil is only for Muslims and it is not for the rest of the world or the rest of the country. And I find that rather strange, because I was writing a piece the other day and I sort of talked about this, and I said that it is quite strange that we have individuals who are speaking in the context of liberalism, but finding it very difficult to accommodate another point of view, simply because that point of view is challenging the wide-held notion which gives these individuals legitimacy. So that is where the problem is. If you start knocking down their precepts, then you delegitimize them. So they have launched a preemptive strike, and it is becoming difficult for individuals in the non-left space to try and find platforms, because you see, not only are the platforms owned by these individuals, but also the custody of the intellectual discourse is also with them, and they overwhelm you with numbers. And as I was telling you, our ecosystem is only growing, but it's not growing, doesn't have the advantage of 60 years of, how should I put it, incumbency in one sense.
Yes.
So we get drowned out very easily. And unfortunately, as Conrad Else once said, there are a large number of voices on both sides which tend to be extremists, and they are then picked on by the left as representing the views of Ratan Sharda and a group of intellectuals such as that. So this is really where the problem is. And this is where we as individuals who find ourselves in the non-left need to really start putting our minds together. So a platform like this, where we can have these conversations, needs to be encouraged, developed, built.
Just to make a few brief remarks before I go to the next question. See, what I do is I define fascism. When somebody says RSS or Hindus are fascists, I just define the term and say, then if this is the term, then who are fascists? Basically, communists are fascists because they don't allow alternative views. There are Abrahamic religions which don't allow alternative views or viewpoints of pluralism. They are fascists. Hindus cannot be fascist. Or to talk of Brahminism is a joke, because Savarkar was the biggest reformer of Hinduism who opposed every Brahminical practice. He makes some very, very caustic remarks about Hindu traditions. He was the one who started having canteen of Dalits, now what are called Dalits. And he would say, if you want to visit the temple first, you have to have food there in this restaurant run by these Dalits. That is a difference that we don't understand. And as far as downing out is concerned, if you really look at it, we may not be legitimized by these voices, but any channel which goes with this kind of thinking of pro-national and rooted in India, their TRPs are high very easily. You can see where people are going. So this voice may not be there in the so-called elite or what you call entitled people, but there's in the people's voice. Now coming to the mainstream, there has been a very typical way of creating a bias. There have been reports where some Bengali Baba or somebody does some jadugari or rapes some woman or something. But when the news comes, they will publish a Pandit's photo, which is actually a person is Muslim. Or if there is, Hindu festival, every Hindu festival will have hate and you will self-loathing about Hindu festivals, which has succeeded to some extent. Only now that Hindus have become more aggressive, you can't see that. And about the riots also, if you see, basically one-eyed approach of riots, Bhainsa riots will disappear from the scene. Any riot in Bengal will be removed from the scene, and they'll not be discussed at all. Or if you go further to electronic media, prime example, lynching incidents, which when somebody like Anand Ranganathan comes, he will talk about various statistics about how many Hindus have been lynched compared to the Muslims. And if you look at Palghar incident, how it has turned out. And then you have this entire CA victimhood narrative which was created. Then there was no coverage of atrocities on the minorities in the neighboring countries. When you discuss CA, you discuss about Muslims, which who lose nothing on the CA, but the narrative carries on. Delhi riots happen, and they start crying, creating a Rudali Act, although the investigations tell you it is something different. And you have been exposing that also. So when this happens, when alternative stories are given by people like you or others in the industry who are very open about it, they don't get a voice in international media. But the discredited left, or with a very small presence or footprint in the media, they get wide coverage in the international media. So this network with the international media, which is again in control of a few, is something that is strength of this, I would say, left and also Islamist world, which is no match, which is much more than what anybody can match. This is something that is to be looked at. Why the alternative story which comes out as compared to the biased story, why it doesn't get coverage internationally? Why they don't pick Times Now news or Republic News, but they pick up some news from a TV which has hardly any legitimacy?
I think once again, we were talking about this, this pipeline of disinformation, this pipeline of privilege that prioritizes one narrative. Now, it's a very, very long, very, very entrenched pipeline. And I have asked myself this question several times. As I said, the entire attempt is to delegitimize, and it happens in 4 different ways. So first of all, just look at the comment that was made by Mr. Owaisi and others in that ecosystem, plus certain left parties. When the court just 2 days ago decided to ask the ASI to dig around and find out what really lay under the Gyan Vapi mosque. Now, the first comment that came out, and I just tweeted about it about an hour back, Ratanji, was that the ASI is the midwife of Hindutva ideas.
Yes.
Now, just look at the way it has been structured. So what you're saying is that today's state is so Islamophobic that a certain denomination in this country will never get justice. The state is so Brahminical that a certain denomination will be permanently excluded. So you just look at the way the attack comes, how it is structured. You are not going to ask, but the ASI looks after, is the custodian of many Mughal structures also. And in some cases does a better job of securing, and
Yes.
I don't want to, I hate to make it Hindu, Muslim or about heritages, but does a better job in safeguarding Mughal monuments or Islamic monuments, but is not as active in doing that when it comes to Indic monuments. So, there is this subtle dog whistle that begins. Now you look at the trajectory of this dog whistle. The next is, so you have said the ASI is bad, it's Islamophobic. Then you look at the court. Then you say the judge must also be, by extension, Islamophobic. Then you take it a little further and then you say, well, the judge is today dancing to the tune of people who are Islamophobic, who are in power. And then, which is a government. And from there on, you draw the line and you say those people today who are speaking in defense of certain policies, not all, but certain policies of the government, must therefore also be Islamophobic, because only these policies are being passed and not the whole plethora of other hundreds of interventions, policy interventions that the government is doing, which has nothing to do, none of the policies have anything to do with advantaging any one section of the public. But you will pick up this thread and you will draw a arc. And once you draw the arc, at one end is the media, at the other end are the courts. In between is the executive. And then you will say that even Parliament today has become less of a forum. And even when certain political parties on the left are beginning to realize their folly and beginning to even vote alongside the government on issues, even they are then characterized as parties that have given up on the project of secularism. On the other side, the left attaches itself to parties that are exclusively Muslim in their orientation or sectarian in their orientation. And that is called widening the tent of secularism. Now, how does this work, Ratanji? Intellectually, it is a complete lie because it's easily exposable. But because it is said by hundreds of people who are in the right places, with the right designations, with the right titular credentials, they will get picked up by foreign media, which is also owned today to a large extent by individuals who are fighting their own ideological battles in the West. So today there has been a capture intellectually, and unfortunately, those who are non-left, as you describe it, are left to either creating their own platforms or fighting with their backs against the wall, against an establishment. And this establishment is no longer confined to Lutyens. It is a global elite.
Yes.
I would think that Lutyens is one of the branches of a global hegemony, which today has begun to influence many political systems across the world. This is a serious threat, intellectual threat. I would say that it is an intellectual missile which is nuclear tipped. And one has to be able to today build capacity to resist this massive attack.
Now I'll come to the most serious attack on the freedom that you talk about, that is the big tech. And I'll give some examples. They are doing mind control and conditioning. We know that how Facebook has actually accepted its role in this. And this is the final frontier for the control of the entire global thinking. That they can deplatform anybody, they can block anybody, they can ban anybody. And the kind of inbuilt algorithms in Twitter, plus their sympathetic editors sitting behind the opaque wall, they allow beheading threats to be done by blue tick people, and they will not be blocked. But a person like True Indology has been multiple times blocked. R. Jagannath, a respectable editor, has been blocked for quoting something. My tweet, which actually quoted a tweet already video available on the internet, about some some secular or Islamist politician, I don't remember exactly. I just posted that with my remark, and I was sent a note saying that this violates the view, it has been complained about, so please you will withdraw. I said, I will not withdraw. You tell me what is illegitimate when it is already available on the internet. So that was not done to me. But if you go behind that further, my Facebook telecast with a Japanese Indian lady about RSS, which was purely very easygoing conversation, was blocked within no time due to some complaints. It is divisive, something or the other. And then you have interesting experience, which is very recent. You'll be surprised. Google has been sanitized. I don't know whether you have tried it or not, but I'll tell you an example. In my RSS 360 book, there are certain sections which were there earlier, but now the publisher wanted some more citations. So I went on searching for more citations. One of it was that Abrahamic religions, wherever they go, they destroy the local civilizations. They are not simply there. So they said, give me a quotation. I said, everywhere in history. They said, no, give citations. So I went on searching citations. I could very easily get citations of Christianity, destroying local civilizations, etc. But I tried finding Islam. Sorry, sir, you can't find. Wikipedia articles, very beautifully sanitized, very beautifully done. If you go to net and you say Hindus attacked by Muslims, after first two searches, it will become Muslims attacked by Hindus, very, very conveniently. So this sanitization was so surprising for me that I was shocked. Then I asked somebody, Baba, this is the particular reference, give me some reference on the books. If this is the kind of control, I'm not even talking, you have gone to the extent of deplatforming, removing it from the platform. Now, suppose today you write an article which is viral, and they can simply delegitimize the platform itself. So a portal will simply disappear because Google will remove it from the Play Store and Amazon will remove it from the server. So this threat to real democracy and freedom of thoughts is something which has to be really worrisome. And that's the article I wrote. Again, I wrote something on that. But I will not get into governance and all that. Let it be, out of government discussion. So this threat, how do you think it is going to affect our world, new world, where we talk of internet connecting everybody and everybody has a right to discuss, etc., etc. And the way it is being monopolized by a few, very, very few oligopolies. I will not even say enlightened people or elite people or academics. It is not becoming an oligopoly of few people who in turn are, pestered by the people down the supply chain line or down the food chain, where they are living their life off earlier from the MNCs, first from the church, then MNCs, now from Islamic fundings. So this approach of totally controlling the mind, totally controlling the thought, and also removing the narrative of other people, this is something that is hugely worrisome. You can elaborate on that. The last question, then we'll open for the people.
Ratanji, a large amount of times, people are called fascists because they succeed in controlling the narrative. What you have told me right now, which is exemplified by cancel culture, is the epitome of fascism.
True.
So people who give us sermons on liberalism and preserving history are the ones, if I were to take some of the examples that you have mentioned and what is happening around the world, what these people are doing is sanitizing history, which is very, very dangerous. And they have the methodology. I was reading a Spectator article, and it was the entire focus of the magazine on 16th January edition was tech supremacy. And it was a piece written by Niall Ferguson, who said Silicon Valley can no longer conceal its power. So what we have been told all these years is that we have brought out something which is beneficent for all of you. It is a panacea. It will help connect the world. It will bring attention to the problems of the world. It will give voices to the voiceless.
Yes.
Now, this has become a massive leviathan, which is controlled by individuals who have taken it upon themselves to edit, censor, editorialize, and most importantly, become the ideological founts of our civilization. And that is where the problem is. Big money coming into what is really today the narration of history. We always came about and we talked about wars and we said history is always written by the victor. Today, the victor is not standing in an armor.
Yeah.
He's not standing with a helmet. He's not standing in a flak jacket. Today, the victor is a more canny individual who, just like Darth Vader, who just had a brain under a helmet, is that individual. And that individual today has the power because he controls the levers of dissemination to put out whatever he wants to. Imagine if all the printing presses of the world, for example, just to tell you, were in the hands of the clergy of the world, what kind of narrative would we have had? We would have still been told that, the earth is the center of the universe, that
A 6,000-year-old.
it is exactly, and that all of us are the children of one God, etc., etc. So you would have been prisoner to a particular ideology. I'll just tell you something which is happening interestingly in England. So cancel culture is being taken to bizarre lengths. I won't name individuals, but in a particular county, they decided to put a plaque under the name of an individual who was also a person who pushed through a bill in Parliament saying that we should only partially dilute, say, slave owning, laws. Now, instead of seeing that as an individual who basically diluted a law, he has been cast as an individual who promoted slavery. You see, if an individual is sitting in 1700, even that much of a correction is a correction.
Yes. Yes.
It is not adding to the problem, it is actually diluting the problem. But you will cast him and you will write on his plaque that he is actually a slave, a promoter of slavery. Then who takes that decision? It then turned out that the entire decision was taken by individuals who were part of the Labour Party, who had won the council election, and therefore they chose to represent history. Now you amplify that and you come to your example, that 2 or 3 Silicon Valley individuals who are smug in their richness, in their billions, think that today they know it all and they can, put out only one particular stream, which means that you are distorting history, and that is fascist behavior. Not what Ratan Sharda does or not what Anand Ranganathan says or I say. This is fascism. Unfortunately, we have to, as I say, coming back to us, either create our own platforms or develop critical mass to expose this at a universal level. And that is where the problem is. And that is where all of us need to start putting our might together.
Thanks. And before I get into the question answer, Swati ji, please see if there are questions. I would just make one remark about this. You talked about 17th century, etc. It's very funny that the left, demonizes Hindus the way women were treated and about sati, etc. But they forget that women had the highest elitist position in India 6,000 years back. As something that happened about 5,000 years back, which they call myth, not reality, but based on the myth they create stories. They are the people who never question burning at stakes of witches. Only women, not even men. Where there is no place for women gods. Not at all. God has to be man. And now they say instead of a man, we will say a woman. And then you have this Islam, which has secondary situation for women. But it is said when Muhammad was there, he in fact raised the level of Islamic, Muslim women, Arab women, which was very bad at that time. In fact, one of those ladies came on TV and, she was making this point that how, Muhammad actually freed the women from kind of Arabic life, tribal life it was. And she was heckled by Maulana. So this strange way of not commenting on something which was wrong just about 14 or 100 years back or 1,000 years back, but go back to 6,000 years back, customs of Hindus is typical example of what you talked about, intellectual terrorism or bullying. I'll open the platform, the ground now for question answers. If there are any questions, please let me know.
Audience can ask question. Any question?
You can
yes,
unmute if
Ratanji,
somebody has a question. I don't mind somebody asking.
Yes, there's a.
But
in
let
the
it
chat,
be brief.
please
So
check.
question should not be like an essay. So just brief question.
Yes. We can have a question from Rahul Chawla. It's in the chat. Should India follow China's footstep in banning foreign social media and build its own internet wall?
Who's the question for? Ratanji, would you like to take it?
Of course, you are the panelist. I mean, you are
Right.
the main panel. You are the guest, so it is
Well,
for you.
I think the beauty of India is its diversity, and we would lose something if we were to do that. I think that the Chinese example is a extreme one. I think other intellectual traditions which are non-left are powerful enough, are confident enough to be able to put their views out there in a manner that will be echoed and will find legitimacy. Had we been worried that our own ideas were not on firm fact and firm ground, ideological ground, then maybe we would need to do that. But I think our intellectual tradition is very rich. It is founded on very firm intellectual arguments. And in fact, we should encourage more platforms to dilute the supremacy of one or two. We should actually have a plethora of more platforms. Let there be more voices. Let there be more platforms.
Swati ji, are you going to select the questions, or I can go ahead?
You can go ahead, select what you want.
The next one says, Priya Yadav, if Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam said luxury and lies have huge maintenance cost, but truth and simplicity are self-maintained without any cost. What do you think of it? What are the consequences of telling lies on the web? I think first it's a statement. I would just take the last part. What are the consequences of telling lies on web? And then there is also, what is the best solution to expose such leftist propaganda? Next question is, I'll take later. Okay. So this particular part of consequence of telling lies on the web and the best solution to expose leftist propaganda.
I'll give you an example. When lies are spewed, lives are lost. There was a UP leader of the Congress party. He put out morphed pictures of RSS workers disrupting relief work in Chennai. There have been, unfortunately, wrong news put out about the extent to which certain individuals in the valley, for example, have been so-called treated by the forces. Now, what does this do? There's also been fake news put out about, for example, RSS workers in the south. What does that do? It has severe consequences because you activate a other group of individuals who then, for the lack of, and this even happened in Bangalore when the riots happened there, and even in Delhi, when fake news was put out, to suggest that one particular community is going to be targeted by another community, in this case, the majority community. What did we see? We saw violence of a shocking proportion directed against individuals of the majority community, which was never reported, by the way, honestly, in the mainstream media. You also saw the consequences of a journalist at the height of the protest that was taking place, illegal protest, on 26 January. That particular journalist found himself being pulled up and exposed. So consequences of lies on social media are grave, depending on the kind.
But Rahul, now that is the question is about the editor who twice has apologized for fake news and deleted it. He gets rewarded by the owner. He doesn't get penalized. He's penalized by people by the hate for him. But actually, the people who are the guardians of this so-called freedom of press and who run the show, if they reward the person back, this is something which is really embarrassing.
I will take you back.
Yeah.
I will take you back, sir, further. If you remember, there were tapes that appeared, courtesy a magazine.
Yes.
Tapes of journalists speaking to a power broker.
Yes.
Now, in my view, those individuals that were doing so were very, very senior people.
Yes.
Extremely influential journalists. I'm surprised that they are back today.
Yes.
And they were legitimized
Yes.
by various individuals who speak about the necessity to have high fidelity to the fact. So as I'm saying, either we should drop our masks. Look, I have a promo. I'm perhaps the only editor and only anchor who in my promo has said that I have an opinion and I will express it and I'm not afraid of expressing it. I have no pretensions. I don't sit there and sit on, some big pulpit and throne and say that, look, I am the fount of objectivity. Objectivity is dead. It is dead the day you pick up a story and decide to debate it.
I just
That
add
is
here a
also
very
an
interesting story, I was talking to a erstwhile colleague. I will not name because it is a show which is supposed to be, just not get into personalities, who said that when he joined NDTV, his boss, the big boss told him that you're a journalist, you're not supposed to have an opinion, you're just supposed to give the news. And he said, what the heck, I have an opinion, what the use of being in journalism if I can't express my views? After 30 years, what do I tell the people what I've done in 30 years in the journalism field of journalism? So if this is the view of your view, this is the view of this gentleman who people will identify easily. I'm not naming because you two are competitors now. But if this is the view, then definitely such journalism has to exist. And it has to
Sir,
be
talking
openly
about
viewed.
that
It
particular
cannot be
establishment,
hidden bias.
I
What
went,
I like is openly saying this rather than, creating a hidden bias with, words like fair enough, fair enough.
no, I went for an interview to the same organization and I was told I was too right of center for that organization. So, when you are in your late 20s, just about 30, and you are looking to put yourself in a position where after your scholarship, you want to put your ideas out there, sow them in the public domain. And if you're told that your ideas are not suitable for dissemination, then what does that do, sir? What does that do? It creates a conformity. And then on top of it, if you are going to bring in the role of fake news to militate against a particular thought process, then it has disastrous consequences.
Right. I will, there is a question on COVID. I will not take it because this is not related to our topic. So there is one about how to spot fake news. And then I would link it to the next question. This question of fake news is by Deepak Achara. Then there's a question by Tushar which says how ethics are important on virtual platforms. Well, we already discussed there are hardly any ethics. So I will let it pass. Rahul wants to comment on that. And next, a couple of questions are very interesting. I'll take them later.
So on the issue of digital platforms coming under laws, I think it's a very, very good move. Why should only mainstream media be responsible for balancing out the facts, etc., and for putting out news that is based on credible facts? I think there are a large number of websites who are in the business of what is known as news dissemination. And these digital news portals should introspect on why they did not develop their own code for so long. For years altogether, these people have put out all sorts of news, have great traction, and are working in an absolutely non-transparent manner. And therefore, when laws are being promulgated to ensure that this doesn't happen, I think this is it's a very, very important step in the right direction. So that's one. Number two, yes, we have to take responsibility also. Look, there will be a lot of news that comes out on social media, and sometimes deep fake news we fall for. I'm going to be very honest. It does happen. You fall for deep fake news. It is very difficult sometimes to put into process systems that are time consuming to verify fact, especially when you're in the business of 24/7 news dissemination. And there are people who have been able to breach your standards of what is known as assessing, sanitizing news, and that can happen. So we are all human, we err, and it's very important that once that is discovered, you take correct remedial measures, you put out corrigenda, etc., you apologize, and you be upfront with your viewers about it. So that is something that today has become a dangerous part and parcel of the work environment. I think those are the two.
Yeah, I will not take Mayuresh's question. I'm sorry, as I told you, that is something to do with COVID, so not in this particular session. Darshana has asked two interesting questions. One is, what is the media literacy and how important is it? And second question already answered. It was about can data and internet policies help us to create a healthy internet? I think this is more or less covered earlier. So you can just give the answer about what is media literacy and how important is it, because that would also cover the question how to spot a fake news.
Yeah, well, look, the process is fairly elaborate in most newsrooms, I would think. At least in Times Now newsroom, it's very, very elaborate. We have at least 3 different checks that are done before we put out any news, even news that is coming in from our correspondents, even though there is a strict policy that that particular news also has to be either verified by the correspondent physically, or has to, if it's source based, at least has to be confirmed by 2 or maybe even 3 sources before we take it on air. Now, over the last few years, we have developed in-house through our university system courses where young people who we are now bringing into, obviously, the news environment, the news industry, there are courses that train you to do a lot of analysis on trying to establish fact from fiction. And there are many, many tactics and strategies that can be employed. Too many here to go into. Suffice to say that I think it is of a pretty high standard, and we should be actually quite complimentary of ourselves that we have been able to, at some level or the other, at least insulate mainstream media from the rampant scourge of fake news that is out there. So I think from that perspective, we've done a good job. I can speak for Times Now for sure.
Yeah, but I will add that this entire internet is so huge, and even if some TV channels like yours are, actually going through this filter before it comes a news, there are thousands of sites which just throw into the net or through WhatsApp some news which is a doctored news, and by the time you realize, because it is so sophisticated that you can't even make out, it's very difficult. But as somebody talked about media literacy, what I meant was that youth can actually, with that tech savviness, they could go and cross-check at various sites or on the Google before they spread the news. So I'll just make that comment. And one question now about from Sabnani Lakhan. He says, respected sir, one question I want to ask, that one man tweets and it becomes a movement. Can platforms like Twitter and Facebook become a voice of underprivileged? I would just add before Rahul takes it that actually it is not one man who tweets. There is a whole set of people who create this particular tweet, and then they echo each other. That is how, if you read Greta's toolkit carefully, you'll find exactly what one man actually is. So Rihanna tweets, why nobody's discussing it? It doesn't mean only Rihanna said it. So there's a whole network of people doing it. So let us not be fooled by saying that one person doesn't, it becomes a movement. And regarding underprivileged, that is a question we raise when you talk about big tech. What do they want to reflect? What do they want to create the narrative about? So that is something that is a much more deeper question. So there are 2 questions we already answered. There is not one man. Second question, Rahul can answer whether Twitter and Facebook can become voice of underprivileged. And that's a very, it's a ironical question, but I'll let Rahul handle it.
Well, the definition of the word underprivileged, if we were to look at it in the narrow sort of definition of it, it would suggest that those would be the people who may not even have access to the web. So from that point of view, these individuals fall beyond the pale. But if you're talking about it from the perspective of those that are underprivileged in the academic sort of milieu, which is that they are somehow sidelined by the mainstream, then that becomes a challenge. Though we have seen that the rise of the political and the intellectual non-left has also coincided with the spread and the growth of social media. So if you really look at it, we have been successfully able to use the medium to our advantage, not just to attract followers, but propagate successfully our point of view. So what it does is, if you are part of an intellectual tradition, for example, if you're in a university where your point of view is not being given much heft, then you can access, you still have the ability to put out your research on a university agnostic platform and at least not deprive people of that particular point of view. But if you're strictly talking in economic terms, then yes, both these mediums still need to penetrate vast areas of our population globally for it to become a true enabler.
There is a actually comment, not really a question, because that is something that we already discussed, and we see that Krishna Dubey says fake news spreads so easily many times by media, but when truth is revealed, it gets buried. Like few months ago during farmers' protest, you people is beating a farmer. But I think this is the first mover advantage that left has. They ambush. They create a news which is not there. By the time you come out and deny it, it's already all over the world. One story I remember very interesting story about a Fair and Lovely baby. I think it was discussed in Times Now also, and whether NewsX, I don't remember. When some this Sanskrit Bharati or some such institution of affiliate of RSS talked about how Vedas help you deliver a healthy baby. That was converted into a Fair and Lovely baby. Then it becomes a Dravidian issue, then became an Aryan issue, racist issue. It went all over the world. So by the time that poor organization could actually respond, it was already an established truth. So basically, this ambush has to be responded very fast, and that is all I can say. Last one is part of the last point of discussion we had, that is about big tech. So Ashutosh says, what are your views on Twitter blocking Trump's account? Was it ethical move by Twitter? So, well, it's obvious, but then Rahul can take it.
No, I think any selective action is unethical. And we have seen plenty of world leaders putting out, especially on the left, putting out a lot of fake news. I mean, I remember that a while back, I think it was February this year, towards the end, just before the budget, I think one of our stalwart politicians from the Congress party, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, spread fake news about train tickets fares being doubled. No one, and I have to emphasize this, no one at that time called it out. All those so-called fake news checkers who say that they are experts at finding out fakery that is spread by the non-left were quiet. It took, I think, Op India to do that story. But by then the damage was done, as Ratan Chadha ji says. By then damage was done. And of course, we never saw action by Facebook, etc., against stalwart politicians. So, I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to say that what Rahul Gandhi said was in the same league as perhaps arguably inciting some sort of an insurgency against the US democracy, etc., that Trump is accused of. I'm not saying that. But what I'm trying to say is that very easily you have had other instances where certain leaders in the left ecosystem have spread devastatingly dangerous fake news. Even casting, as I said, their commentary on CAA in a highly toxic light. But no action was taken. Now, you have to ask why. On the other hand, we have seen deplatforming of, as Ratan Chadha ji was saying, voices on the right, including himself from time to time. So this is palpably wrong. I mean, no one in their right minds can actually come out here and say that this is right.
But they have left mind. That is the problem.
So, you can put it that way. But the point is this. The point is that it is selective, and that is wrong. Whether
there is a hand
academics or it is.
Please.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
No, I go to the next question. You want to add something to this? Okay, there is a hand.
Yeah, I see cancel culture now very much a tool that is being used.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is a hand raised by Manoj.
So
Manoj has a question. I saw hand raised. Has Manoj a question?
I think he's not there now. Okay. So I think we can wind up now because we are overshooting the time now.
Okay, so before Swati ji takes over to thank, I would thank Rahul personally. I know how hectic the 24/7 news channel running is. So starting from early morning till late night, and then again next morning the grind starts. I've seen this from very close quarters. When we finish the last session and we sigh, we go back to bed. We know in the morning at least we'll sleep well. And sometimes you can't sleep well. That is not truth, because some debates become so hot and so disturbing that you can't sleep easily. Your mind is so much disturbed. But for somebody to run such a show in the night, then next morning, and nearly all the editors, I would not say one, apart from very well-established, lazy senior anchors and journalists, actual editors, they end up the day at 12 in the morning, 6, they're again up. So despite all this, and Rahulji not only just came, he also prepared the notes, didn't come just like, okay, I know everything. So that shows the humility and readiness to do everything very sincerely. And of course, I can share that I also spent about yesterday whole day trying to put right kind of questions to him. So his time is well spent. I hope the youth who are in this particular discussion would love to see this again and try to get the right lessons and also the right messages, and then go back with solutions which they can use to make better use of the net and the social media available to them. Thanks, Swati. You can please conclude the session.
Thank you
Ratan
so much.
Sharda, before we conclude, I just want to thank you, because I would have always made the time out for you. You are
thank
an
you, sir.
individual whose scholarship I deeply respect, and of course, I would have given an arm and a leg to be part of a cause, and I see this as a larger
privileged.
cause. So thank
I'm
you so much.
privileged. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you for
Thank
taking
you.
our time and guiding us to helping them understand so many issues. Thank you so much, Namaskar.
Thank you.
So audience, we meet after 1 hour again for the last and final session.